Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the Carriage and Partners webinar series. My name is Renisa Peterson and I'm a consultant with the firm. As part of our vision to transform the leadership landscape, we have been working on a series of leadership events, and in embracing these current digital times, we are launching these online. We are delighted you are joining us today for our inaugural webinar with a topic surely to be on everyone's minds: leadership and innovation in times of crisis. For context on who is with us online as part of this community, we have around 180 people joining us today. Approximately a quarter of you are CEOs, 20% are board directors or chairs, and the rest are a cohort of senior executives from a broad range of sectors. Haere mai. Some housekeeping matters to begin with. Firstly, you have all joined this webinar on mute, and please rest assured you're not on video, so you can sit back and relax. You will remain on mute by default, so no need to stress about background noise either. Secondly, we encourage you to participate by asking questions throughout this session. On the bottom of your screen, there is a Zoom chat function button, Q&A. Please type in your questions and we will address the most popular ones during our panel session, which I will expand on shortly. Thirdly, we wanted to share the structure of our webinar today so you know what to expect. Following introductions, Chiwei Kwan will be delivering a presentation and screen share with us all. At the conclusion of this, we will all reconvene for a Q&A panel session with Vicki Maclean. Chiwei is a partner with our firm. He has over 30 years experience in senior roles spanning government, corporate sectors and global HR, and leading consulting firms. Leveraging his background in organizational psychology, Chiwei is an advocate of leadership, development, and coaching. He was the founding CEO of the Singapore Human Capital Institute. He is adjunct faculty with Duke Corporate Education, working with clients globally through Asia, South Africa, and even Kazakhstan. He moved to New Zealand in 2011 and has led research on CEO development here in Aotearoa, with insights on how to develop the next generation of chief executives in New Zealand. Please welcome Chiwei.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you, Renisa, for the introduction. A very good morning, one and all. I hope you're all keeping well and probably have had your first fast food fixes over the last 2 days of level 3. Well, thank you once again for taking time to join us this morning. Now, for the past weeks, I am sure all of us would have spent most, if not all of our time and energy focusing on the immediate needs of keeping the business operating in some shape or form. And I'm sure we're all looking to a move to level 2 and probably level 1 in the next couple of weeks. As a country, as a people, we've come a long way since 5 weeks ago when we went into level 4. Now, as directors, chief executives, senior leaders, I'd like you to ponder on a few questions at this point in time. Have you thought about your leadership in this time of crisis over the last 5-6 weeks? How are you leading your people? How are you leading your community? And how are you leading yourself as you come to terms with working from home over the last few weeks? How significantly has your business been impacted? And will it ever revert back to business as usual as you know it a couple of weeks ago? Have you thought about innovative ways of doing what you do? Perhaps new products and services arising out of this crisis? Perhaps new customer segments? New business partners, or maybe new competitors have entered your industry. Now let's take a look at the 3 horizons of change in the slide in front of you. As I said earlier, we would have been spending the bulk of our time in the last few weeks resolving immediate challenges with making sure our people are paid, customers who stay engaged with our customers, grappling with the technology of working remotely, engaging your business partners, and so on and so forth. And now that we're in level 3 and moving to level 2 very shortly, we all hope, how will the business look like once we return to some sense of normalcy? And the third bubble there is as I mentioned earlier, did we take the opportunity to reimagine what the business will look like? And I think this is a big question for a lot of leaders that's been grappling with COVID-19 over the last few weeks. A few other questions I'd like us to think about as do a short presentation of the next 20 minutes. Now, what if we have to revert back to level 4 because of a second wave of infection, as we're seeing in countries like Singapore and Japan? Well, we have clearly come out of level 4 in a very, very positive situation as a country. I don't believe we're by any means out of the woods just yet. If you see what's happening in many parts of Asia, where it's just beginning to break out in large numbers, if you look at what's happening across the US and many parts of Europe, the numbers are still pretty daunting. So we're by no means out of the woods. And if you look at all the indicators, they're all pointing to a possible vaccine only in the next 12 to 18 months. And until then, I'm not sure how international travel can resume. And at best, we might have a trans-Tasman bubble where we shuttle between the two locations. Now, what impact will this have on your business if you have staff in places outside of New Zealand? If you have suppliers, if you have business partners that are in other countries, how will you continue to work and engage them in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years and going beyond that? What if social distancing becomes the norm? How will this impact your customer-client interface? And what if your business model has been changed irreversibly because of COVID-19? And I can only empathize with businesses that are in hospitality or travel-related industries because they have been greatly, greatly impacted. So really, reimagining becomes very real in the new normal. If you look at what we've gone through the last couple of weeks, there's an exponential increase in the level of digital engagement for most companies. And because of the restricted or almost zero international travel, that's really changed the face of how you engage a lot of your partners and staff remote. The growth in wellness and hygiene-related industries is probably going to be here to stay. And with people nesting, not resting at home, it's thrown up potential opportunities for business ideas and business revenue opportunities. And if you think about the economic impact of what it's having on us as individuals, as businesses, as families, I believe discretionary spending will be the way moving forward. So we're likely to see an increased spending on essentials, and perhaps luxury goods and things that are nice to have will take a big hit. So how will this impact what we do in our business? And I think it's important to take this opportunity to really have a good look at what we do. For me, I think it will be a great missed opportunity if we've been responding to the past couple of weeks as a pure crisis management approach, and expecting that business will go back to normal once COVID-19 is sorted out. Well, you know what? I don't think it will be sorted out the way the way we hope it will be in the immediate term. And I think this is a great time, given that this is very much a burning platform for many businesses, to take the opportunity to reimagine and see what we can do differently. Now, underpinning all this, there's a big question about what do we do with our best people? And I'm sure all of you would agree with me that in good times and bad times, it's important to retain and develop your people. But you know what? It is actually in times of crisis that we often forget to continue to invest in our best people. When business is good, we just assume people are going well. We never have time to set aside to train and develop people. But it's really in times of crisis like that when things and activities are slowing down, that it's a great opportunity to think about what we do with our people. How do you keep your best talent? Because you know what, if you don't do it now, if you don't do the right thing with your people now, they'll be out of the door when things recover. Perhaps not just immediately, because everyone's still grappling with the new normal. But when things go back to some sense of normalcy, you can rest assured that your best people will look outside, will look across the road, and perhaps join your competitors. So underlying all this, what is the role of all of us as leaders in terms of leading our people through this phase of crisis, to reimagine the business, and to try and keep our best people engaged? So obviously, we've done, I believe most of, if not all of us, would have done all we can to reassure our people that there is some sense of a future going forward. As we get into level 3, potentially 2 and 1 shortly, to create that sense of excitement that we will get back to some sense of business normalcy shortly. And last but not least, how do we continue to inspire? And I think this is a key point for many of us on the call today, that people just be very conscious that people look up to you as leaders of the business. And it's important that you are very conscious of how you project yourself, and people look up to you for inspiration. So on the back of that, let me dive a bit more into the details of what we mean when we talk about reimagine the business. So the first question, as you can see, it's let's look at what's come out of the current situation that can give rise to new products or services. And when we talk about reimagining, we're talking about reimagining from your core strengths. What are you doing well? What are your core competencies? And how can you use this to produce other goods or services that will address the needs of the customers in this time? There are many examples that I'm sure all of us would have seen in the media, from companies making perfumes and alcohol to producing hand sanitizers, from bridal boutiques and clothing manufacturers to producing face masks, car, automobile parts manufacturers producing ventilators. Great example is this company in the UK that used to make seat covers and headrest covers for Emirates, which was the #1 client. And you can imagine with air travel now almost down to 5% of what used to be normal, they've converted the entire production line to produce PPE, and that's given them a new lease of life. Now, again, like I say, these are all examples that are staring us in the face. Or strongly encourage all of us to relook at what we do in terms of its application in adjacent type industries, and see how can we leverage what we do really well and do it for something in a different set of environment or situation. Can we explore new customer segments and delivery mechanisms with your current services and products? Now, again, over the last few weeks, we've been inundated with things that can be done online, from music lessons to education, to gym classes, to medical consultation. All these are already being done over internet, over video. Question is, what more can you do in terms of what your business is all about at this point? In terms of new customer segments, again, I think for many of the businesses, when times are good, you probably don't have to think too hard in terms of expanding your customer base, because you've got a pretty good brand out there, you've got a captive market. But it's in this time of crisis where things are starting to slow down that it's probably it will be helpful to explore, based on your existing customer base, what more would they buy from you? What other products and services that you offer that you think they might be of interest to them? Have you asked your best clients and customers who else they think in their ecosystem they might recommend to you as customers? So again, I strongly encourage all of us to think of other types of customer segmentation that you might not have really invested in when times are good. Who can we partner with to deliver value-add products and services? And here, I guess the point here is to really think outside the box, so to speak. It's not what I would call your traditional partners, which I'm sure you're all already working closely with. It's your non-traditional partners. So let me give you a simple case in point. We would all know of the wine brand Villa Maria. And obviously in the COVID-19 situation, they need to continue to harvest the grapes from the vineyards. The question is, how do they do that while maintaining social distance and all the safety and health and safety measures? Where are the grape pickers going to stay if they're going to be locked down with their bubble? So guess what? They partnered with a holiday camper van rental company to provide on-site accommodation for the grape pickers and their immediate family, where they can be in lockdown with their bubble. And they can continue to work on 8-hour shifts over 24 hours, 3 shifts. And voila, that's a fantastic solution to partnering with what you would call a non-traditional partner to deliver an outcome that works for both organizations. There are probably many other examples out there that you might be aware of, or I strongly encourage you to think about what I call non-traditional partners. This might be your supply chain partners. This might be your regulators, government institutes that you want to have a discussion with. In fact, you might even want to consider getting input from your customers. And sometimes if you're in B2B business, the customers of your customers might be able to give you some insights on what else you can do better. Can we do more with less? It's amazing. I think in some recent conversations with leaders that we've been working closely with over the last few weeks, there's pretty much a consensus that productivity has increased during lockdown, with a lot less coffee breaks, a lot less coffee banter at the pantry. People are stuck to the screen. And organizations have actually realized that, you know what, we are actually more efficient. So the question is, you look at your own organization, your business, that over the last few weeks, what have you done in terms of productivity? And can you do with less resources? The next point, I believe this is a good time to review your business model in terms of what is probably less profitable. Again, when times are good, this is probably not top of mind because your revenue comes from your core business. But it's a good time to look internal, clean house, and see what are some of the things that you might want to just get out of your portfolio. Can we relook at how we engage our customers, our suppliers, our contractors, and other stakeholders? Now, the point I made earlier about almost no international travel, you really need to relook at how you engage your people, your customers, your suppliers. If in the past you would not hesitate to jump on the plane, whether it's domestic travel, whether it's international travel. Now, domestic travel may resume, but you know what? Over the last few weeks, I'm sure we'll all have been engaging with our customers over video, over Zoom, Skype, or whatever. The question we need to ask ourselves is how much has that impacted our engagement with our people? And frankly, I think many of us would agree that the impact in terms of negative impact has been quite minimal because, if you know your customer, engaging them over camera, it's not that different from jumping on a plane and meeting them. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, if you're meeting someone for the first time, nothing beats the face-to-face interaction. But as it is, as we was looking at no international travel today, we really need to look at how best to engage our people and the contractors and suppliers going forward. To give you another specific example, we know of a company that's in the heavy industry engineering industry in this country that have now locked in the supplier, the contractor, for 10-year contracts, which in the past it's an annual contract with the contractors that's up for renewal every 12 months. But in a time of crisis like that, they thought about it. The contractor needs that guaranteed cash flow, guaranteed side of business in order to stay viable. Has declined, and the fact that the contractor has been a trusted business partner for the last 5 years, what's there to stop them from engaging in a much longer term contract where it works for both and it probably give them a bargaining chip in terms of better pricing, and it gives a contractor a lifeline in terms of sustainable income over the next couple of years. So again, I strongly encourage us to relook at our business, our suppliers, our contractors, and see how can we work with them in a different mode. And last but not least, in terms of how we have traditionally operated compared to what we've done over the last few weeks, I believe for one, many organizations would now have come to realize that we don't need that much office space. We're probably just as effective working from home for many businesses. So in terms of operating environment, flexibility, working from home to suit different segments of your people, I believe this has changed irreversibly for many organizations over the last few weeks. Let me dive a bit deeper into retention and development of talent. I think this is where the role of leaders is key. As I said earlier, it's really in times of crisis that we really need to look after our best people. Because if we don't do the right thing now, with the advent of social media, you can rest assured that your leadership brand, your employer brand, will be out in the open if you don't do the right things. I'll give you some examples later. So first and foremost, in terms of talent, how are we communicating with our people in times of crisis? And I'm sure you read from all quarters of research and all that. The trick to this is communicate, communicate, communicate. You cannot over communicate in times of crisis. And you should communicate what you know. You should also communicate what you do not know and be open and transparent about it. And I think this is the best time to really bring people all into the fold in terms of what the company is going through. And oftentimes you'll be amazed at how much your staff and your employees will be on board if you're very open with them in terms of what the challenges that the company is facing. Who are your best people? And I'm sure you know who your best people are. But I would challenge you to go beyond that and look at who are your best performers versus who are your best performer who has the potential to step up to larger roles within the organization. This is a great time to look at what the development needs are and make conscious and deliberate efforts in putting them through some form of development program. Again, in terms of retention, I'm sure all of you are already doing that, is to keep your best people engaged. Keep them focused on the future. Keep them focused on doing things that's going to make them get out of the blocks faster, better than the competitors once we get back into some sense of normalcy. So again, you can look at this from both internal and external perspectives. And again, I believe many of us are already doing that. From an internal perspective, look at cleaning house. Look at your database, look at your key account management system, look at your business processes. What are the things that can be streamlined? What are the things that can be improved on? If you look at the external situation, look at how you can keep engaged with your customers, your suppliers, and all that. And I believe once we get back to some sense of normalcy, the pent-up demand is going to come back for many businesses. So the question is, how do you get your people ready to be out of the blocks once we get back to some sense of normalcy? And the point about developing our staff while we're less busy, again, leadership plays a key role here. And if your best people and your talent can see that in times of crisis, when revenue is taking a hit, the company is still investing in me, it sends a very powerful message to people that, you know, this is a company that's worth staying with. And development and learning does not need to cost you an arm and leg. In fact, it's in this time of crisis that we increasingly see a lot of free and open resources out there in the market. Just for example, Harvard University has put out 67 online courses for free in the last few weeks. So again, development and learning and keeping your talent engaged does not mean sending them to expensive programs overseas. And by the way, for that matter, overseas executive programs are probably dead for quite a while until international travel resumes. So a lot of things can be done on the cheap, even free, over video. Again, as leaders, I strongly encourage all of us to think creatively about how to keep our people busy and engaged. And last but not least, I think this time of crisis is a great opportunity for us as leaders to lead by example. I'm sure many of us would have a set of corporate values hung up on the wall somewhere in the office. This is the best time to walk the talk. And you know what? If you have to make deep cuts just to keep the business going, start from the top. Make the deepest cuts from the top before you impact the people lower down the food chain. So really, I think for me, it all boils down to what is the role of leaders, chief executives in this time of crisis, as you continue to work with your people to retain and develop them. Just to put a couple of things in more simple terms, and I'm sure all of us on the call, whether you're a board director, chair, or chief executives, or senior leaders, or head of HR, you'll all be doing most, if not some of this, if not most of this, and some of you will be doing many more things. So just a couple of key notes here for boards. This is a great time to really look at the governance management divide. And it's not a time for them versus us. It's time to reinforce that we are one team. And many board directors, given their many more years of experience compared to the chief executive, would have seen other crises come and go. The GFC 10 years ago, many of you would have had experienced that when you were in executive roles. This is a time to be a sounding board and to be a coach to your chief executive. Be present, be available for consultation. We're in this together. For chief executives, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important that you are present, visible, and be seen to communicate and over-communicate. Inspire your people. Shift the focus from problems to solutioning. Involve people in your team. Not just yourself, your executive team, but I would strongly encourage you to involve people at all levels. And again, you'll be amazed in terms of reimagining your business, the quality of ideas that come out from some of your more junior talent. And for people looking after HR or the chief people officer role, it's obviously incumbent on us to stay close to the ground and be the eyes and ears of the chief executive. Coach your ELT to role model corporate behaviors and the behaviors that you've all the while been promoting. And again, reach out to your network, and I'm sure all of us are already doing that. So really, to sum up, leadership is key. The team looks up to you, right? So it's important that you project a sense of optimism, obviously balanced with realism. But think about how you're coming across to your team, to your people, to the community that you serve. Manage what's urgent, but also important to focus on what is important, what is the end game. This is a crisis, no doubt. We all have to get through this. But it's also important to continue to stay true to what your mission and your vision is for the business. And don't let a crisis like this totally derail you from what your vision and mission is. It's a team sport. And in the last couple of weeks, we hear from a lot of leaders we speak to that obviously they're stressed, they have pressures on revenue, they can't network with the clients, the customers, and so on. Look, you don't need to have all the answers. Involve people. You'd be amazed at how much your staff understand what you're all going through, as long as you're open and transparent about the runway that the company has. Right? And you'd be amazed at how much people are prepared to do in order to help the company, because in the end, it's going to come back and help themselves. So I talked about realism with optimism earlier. Oftentimes, when one door closes, other doors may open if you look hard enough. And really, at the end of this, it's important, and I think a time of crisis is a great time to create, if you haven't done so, or reinforce a culture of innovation, because it's going to help you cope with the next crisis. And last but not least, retain and develop your best people, because these are the people that's going to help you drive the company forward. Never, ever underestimate the power of reimagination, especially from some of your more junior staff. So let me leave you with this message here, and perhaps a picture paints more than 1,000 words, right? Your leadership brand is key. If you've been following what's come out of the media in the UK, you would know that Richard Branson, a couple of weeks ago, first of all, asked his staff in Virgin Atlantic to take 8 weeks of no pay leave, which led to a really bad social media publicity. And then he made a U-turn and pledged about $250 million in order to keep jobs. But more recently, he's asked the government for $500 million to bail out the airline while he spends his time walking around his private island. So go check out that website at the bottom. But really, for me, that's just, like I say, your leadership brand is key. It's important that you think about how you're projecting yourself to your people, to your talent, to your customers, to your community, because if you don't do the right thing, rest assured it will come back to haunt you. So let me leave you with this, and I'll hand you back to Renisa, and I'd love for you to type in your questions, and hopefully we can get to some answers. Renisa, over to you.
Thank you, Chi-Wei. Many thanks indeed for that, Chi-Wei. We have had a number of questions and comments come through, and you certainly have sparked food for thought. One of the more popular questions was if we would get access to this presentation And yes, indeed, we will share the slide deck with you all via email following the seminar. Please can we also request that you send your questions using the Q&A function instead of the Zoom chat function. Thank you. And welcome also to Vicki Maclean. Vicki is a partner and she brings over 30 years experience in executive search. She's been with the Carriage team since 2006 and has seen numerous leaders and their styles, working on a plethora of CEO, C-suite, GM level, and board appointments. Vicki also serves on a number of not-for-profit boards and brings a lens of governance in times of crisis. Vicki is a native of Scotland and brings warmth and wit to her work and is renowned for being direct and transparent in her approach. Welcome, Vicki.
Kia ora, thank you very much indeed, and a really interesting presentation. Thank you, Chi-Wei.
Thanks, Vicki. To launch our questions, the first is, what are the leadership qualities that are important to create a culture of innovation in good and bad times? Keen to get both your insights on this. We'll start with Vicki.
Thank you, Renisa. I think when you look at this, senior leaders need not be the only ones who are the innovators, and it's more important that we ultimately create a culture of innovation. And such a culture really needs to emanate from business as usual, but it'll even be more challenging in times of crisis. So you've got this team, and I think, Chi-Wei, you touched on that it's a team sport. So trust your people. When it comes to innovation, micromanagement is an utter disaster. Give permission. Allow this environment to be a safe environment and celebrate innovation. Have a team with you that is diverse in their skills, their backgrounds, their ethnicities, their age, and allow these diverse people to really talk and ensure that you're listening, that you hear all of those voices. And I draw you back to Chi-Wei's slides that really there's some information there that will help you spring from this and encourage your team to innovate.
Thanks, Vicki. That's helpful. The next question correlates to your presentation, Chi-Wei. What is the biggest barrier to leaders' ability to reimagine?
That's a good question, because we talked a lot about reimagination, but it's obviously easier said than done. Now, the challenge I see is that's a real paradox in terms of what organizations are doing, right? On one hand, we're all about performance and efficiency, which equals predictability. When you talk about innovation, reimagination, it's really about non-routine and uncertain. So maybe a way to illustrate this, are we short-term focused, are we long-term focused, or we're both? So if you think about listed companies where we traditionally look at quarterly, 6-monthly results, you can rest assured that organizations and chief executives will be focused on the here and now, delivering KPIs for shareholders. And in a lot of large companies, that in itself is a barrier to reimagining and innovation. But conversely, the question is, do you reimagine in good times or do you imagine in bad times? And if you look at the truly successful companies in the world today, you're basically reimagining while the going is good. Because in times of crisis, you will have additional financial pressure to do that. And back to the point about, what do you need to create a culture of innovation? If you've not been innovating as a company for the last number of years of existence, you're not going to be innovative tomorrow. But it's never too late to start. So, the first thing is, if you talk about any sort of culture, it starts from the top. So for a leader to start to imbibe a culture of innovation, it's really to convey, why are we doing this? What's the point of innovating? Why don't we go back to business as usual? So it has to be linked back to the strategy, the vision, and the mission of the company. And then, really creating that sense that it's okay to come up with ideas, create the platform for people to generate ideas, allow people to experiment. The question here is, what do you do when people fail when they're experimenting? Do they get a hard knock, or do they get asked, what have you learned from the failure? So, I mean, if you go into all the innovation textbooks, they'll tell you the process and structure to create around that. That's no rocket science. But for me, it comes back to the basic premises. While we are short-term focused on delivering revenue and indicators, we also need to look at how we constantly reimagine the business. It's not a dichotomy.
Thank you, Chiwe. It's no surprise that the next questions that we're having are from the governance arena, given that we've got quite a few board members on this call. In your observation of working with boards and as a director yourself, Vicki, you'll have a view on these questions. The first one is, how can I as a board member or chair help my CEO during this time? And there's another question that correlates, so I'll group them. Can you say more about how does the board balance their responsibility to the survival of the company and also to the executives and employees?
Thank you, Renisa. What I'm not going to do is spout forth what's coming out of McKinsey. You'll all be getting masses of that on your email. What I'm going to talk about is first-hand observations that I've made being fortunate enough to talk to many of our community. If I think about a large private enterprise that's really struggling at the moment, and part of that is because they're going to have to let people go that they really don't want to. What my observation has been there is that the chair is a real pillar of wisdom. He's been around the block a few times. There's not much he hasn't seen. But his presence through communication has been really a calming influence. And it's really that ability to listen and get alongside your CEO, but also get along other members of the senior leadership team so that they're assured that they're not there in a way in isolation. It's not a them and us situation, you're in this together. And I think also it's leading by example. So we've seen some of our organizations, our listed businesses, that the examples that they showed was it was the people at the front line that were going to really experience the most pain when it came to taking cuts. And then we had other organizations that came out right at the top, directors in some cases took no fees, reduced fees. They took a couple of people out of senior leadership teams. They took big pay cuts. And really, the trickle-down effect was that the people at the front line were not really being affected. And that's real leadership by example. And then other organizations have been shamed to follow suit of the people that have been really treating their company, their employees, and their shareholders how they'd ultimately like to be treated themselves.
Thank you, Vicki. So
Renisa, if I may, I like to think that the reason the board exists is because you have board members that are well connected with companies and industries outside of that organization itself. So this is no better time for a board to leverage the collective network and contacts they have out in the market to bring to bear possibilities in terms of reimagining the business. So again, in addition to dealing with the here and now, the urgent stuff, how can the board leverage its contacts and network to work with the executive team and allow that possibility and experimentation in terms of reimagining the business? So, like I say, work your board, use them, but and from the board's perspective, approach this in the whole sense that we're in this together. It's not them versus us.
Thanks, Chiwe. It's interesting to hear you speak and you see the best and worst of humanity in times like this. So a lot of the stories that we're seeing come through are really reflecting that. The next grouping of questions are about organizational culture and leadership. So I'll start with you, Chiwe. I'm keen to get your perspectives as well, Vicki, on this. I'll group the questions together. The first one is, ideally, we come into the crisis with a great culture, but that is not always the case. How can a leader improve the culture in a lockdown? And then correlating to that, we've had another question. How do your staff know that you as a leader really care about them? You can email and Zoom them, but should you do more as people are the greatest asset, e.g. introduce some fun into the organization, recognize birthdays, send a cake by courier to a home address, what else? So keen to get your thoughts first, Chiwe.
Thank you, Renisa, and for whoever sent in a question, thank you for your question. Vicki, I'll let you speak about what we're doing within Carriage and Partners. I think that would be fantastic for you to share some of the initiatives you're doing. But let me address the first part of the question in terms of, if I recall correctly, how do we build a culture in times of crisis? Right, Renisa?
That's right.
So go back to something I mentioned earlier, that if you have not been innovative as a business or as a culture up to now, you're not going to be a different animal overnight. But again, and I say but, with the crisis over the last few weeks, there's no better time to really look at what the strategy is and what sort of organization culture is really going to be much more aligned to what we want to do. So in terms of the role of the leader, the first thing I would say is, in addition to communicating with your people, be open in terms of you saying, I don't have the answers. We're in this together. And when the leader starts to show some form of what I call vulnerability and inviting others down the food chain to contribute ideas and initiatives, that's just a start. I'm trying to think about a quote from a Nobel laureate who once said that people are, if you put fences around people, they become sheep. Yeah, and we know sheep, they all think and act alike. But if you think of people like rabbits and you know how to manage rabbits, they multiply to the extent that you can't contain them. So for me, it's just an analogy in terms of ideas. If you, I'm not saying we treat our staff like rabbits, but if you encourage that sort of idea generation to come up from bottom up, that's a great start. You know, what platforms exist within the company today for people to bring up ideas? When people bring up ideas, do they get shut down immediately? Because, you know, the senior folks always know best, that ain't gonna work, this ain't gonna work. So creating a culture of innovation is, don't get me wrong, it's not just about ideas. That's another often quoted equation where innovation is not just ideas. Innovation is ideas plus execution. And it's execution that often falls over. So we don't want a company with people who just bring up 10 ideas every day in terms of what should we be doing, right? But so I would say innovation is a bit of an art, it's a bit of a science. Once you have the ideas bubbling up from the bottom, we need to have a system and a process in terms of filtering out what's big, too big and too hairy and too audacious. The other thing I think Vicki might have mentioned earlier, we need to innovate from our core strengths. We're not going to build the next iPhone, right? But let's look at our core competency and look at what we do well and look at what we can do, what we do in what I call adjacent industries with complementary partners and products that we can perhaps package together to offer something more integrated. So innovate from a position of strength. And I'll just end off by answering this question and say, you need to have what I call innovation champions within the organization so that ideas don't get killed once they are brought up at the junior level. You need people who are respected within the organizations that become champions of some of these ideas that hopefully can provide the system, the structure, the resources to take it to some form of prototype where you put it to test. And to finish off, there must be a culture within the organization that you allow people to fail fast, fail cheap, fail safe. But it's easier said than done.
Thank you, Chiwe. I would acknowledge everything that Chiwe said. On just the innovation side of things, and then I'm going to answer the question about what we're doing at Kerridge and Partners. Some of the things that I've really been impressed by is pivoting from your core business and looking at, so a couple of examples. Many of you will know Josh Emmett, an eminent chef with lots of outstanding restaurants. What he's done through Instagram is he's brought us into his home with his family, his wife and his young sons, and all of a sudden we can make decent Anzac biscuits, we can make lamingtons, we can do a whole variety of different dishes. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and support him in his restaurants when COVID is lifted. The other one that has caught my imagination is Juliette Hogan, for example, one of New Zealand's most talented designers. Now, on her Instagram postings, she's encouraged all our young tinies and young teens into creating a design, send it into them, and they will pick a design that we put on a t-shirt. Now, that's captured everybody's imagination, but also it's giving people an opportunity. Is this a path that I want to follow? So I think it is talking to your customer base, talking to your client base. What else can we do for you that's adjacent to what we're doing now? It's not completely going out and trying to imagine a new iPhone. If you look at, say, Soul Machines, which is an Auckland-based AI digital company, they've just secured 40 million Series B investment. And what they're taking is their digital avatars, which have been used in banking traditionally and the airline industry, and now they're extending that into different sectors. The other thing that I would look at is look at relationships that have maybe been fractured or fragmented in the past, and think, you know, they could be an organization that's in trouble now. Now's an opportunity. How can we go and help them and invest goodwill into aspects of the economy that are struggling or that have got massive growth potential? For example, the productive sector. So when I then move over to what we're doing at Kerridge and Partners, we've got some really interesting things that we do. We communicate, and we communicate. We have gatherings that we meet each other, like our traditional rituals of our work in progress on a Monday morning. But we use Teams as our mechanism for doing that. And for those of you who are old enough and been around as long as I have, we've taken on University Challenge, because you're all sitting in your little boxes and you've got your mascot, you've got your scarf, and which university am I at and what am I reading today? And it's jumbling it up and it's making a bit of fun. For those of us, one of our participants said, you know, how do you make people feel really wanted? And know that beyond Zoom and beyond Teams that we care for them, we pick up the phone. And I was listening to my husband last night, which I'd be very grateful for, because I don't often listen to him. And he was saying that emails are out of fashion. It's speed over elegance now. Pick up that phone, talk to your team, which I think is critical. Really talk to your team and get a temperature check. Really begin to understand what they're feeling, what their concern is, and get them to talk to each other. I think it's really important. I could whittle on all day about that, but I'm going to stop now.
Thanks, Vicki. It's interesting hearing both of you comment, and a couple of the questions and comments that have come through is people putting their own thinking caps on and imagining examples of what they're observing in the market themselves. So an individual talked about Cookie Time, and it's a social enterprise who couldn't sell their end product, but they saw the flour shortage caused by packaging shortages as opposed to product shortages. So they quickly pivoted using their existing packaging to create gourmet cookie kits, thus moving further up the supply chain themselves and picking up on current demand. We've had a number of questions come through asking to share examples of what we're seeing in the market about people seizing opportunity. And Chiwe, you talked about a couple of those during your presentation as well. I'm conscious of time, so for the last section of question groupings, we've had quite a few come through around mental health and how to keep a positive culture within your team in what is an unprecedented time for everybody. And you know, one of the most moving things I observed in a client meeting was we had some engagements with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, and one of the team members shared that as a result of the health policies that have been put in place to protect people through COVID, it's meant that certain sacred funeral rites that one would typically do on a marae aren't allowed, which was really hard from a faith-based perspective for them. Equally, in terms of this topic of pivoting and mental health, on the pivoting side, they have taken advantage of the tiny home trend, and they did a bulk order for a large number of easy build kits that were small enough to fit on the backyards of whānau, so that for those families that needed to have family members to self-isolate, often they live quite close together, there was an opportunity for them to self-isolate, yet within proximity to the rest of the whānau. So they pivoted quite quickly in putting those orders in and setting up a framework for that to manage it safely. On the innovation side, they did their first ever online kapahaka performance where the elders in the community filmed the choreography and shared it with youth. So those are just some things that I've personally observed in conversations. I'm sure all of you will have stories like this. So on those themes of mental health and building a positive culture, keen to get your insights first, Vicki, and then we'll move to Chiwe as well.
Thank you, Renisa, and thank you for sharing your insights. I believe, in fact, the gentleman that told me this information's just left our webinar. It was Craig McAlpine. One of the things I think there is a real temptation when you're at home is never to leave your office, whether your office is your dining room table, your kitchen table, or your bedroom. What you have to really do is put a close sign on it. You have to get away from your office, and you really have to be disciplined about putting down all of these devices that crowd our lives. Be really disciplined. You will never ever get time like this again with your family or your loved ones. So take the time to shut the door. One of the things that I feel is really important, and I see it in myself, and I encourage anybody who comes near me in any shape or form to do this, is you have to get out. You have to get your fresh air, and you have to do exercise of some sort. And even if you can...
Renisa, I think Vicki's frozen for one reason or another.
Apologies, everyone. Oh, yeah.
She's back.
Know that I'm a little bit bonkers about rowing. And if you take an 8, for example, no one oarsman is going to win a race through individual performance. But each member has a really important part to play, whether it's the cox who steers the boat and is the voice of the boat, or the stroke who's like a metronome that passes that stroke down through the team. And you've got your core in the middle, the big engine rooms, and then you've got your bowman that's really going to be a technical expert and set the balance of the boat. Well, if you can take, say, the analogy of an 8 and use that in your team environment and get people to start moving around and doing different things in their everyday life, then I think that that also is really good for mental health, because it's taking them out of their comfort zone. In addition, I think you have to eat really, really well. I think there is a temptation for some people to drink too much and not eat well enough. I think cut down on the alcohol, eat well, and try and get a real rhythm of going to bed at a reasonable time.
So, Vicki, thanks for that. I mean, just some quick comments in terms of mental health. I mean, we all appreciate that it can be lonely at the top, right? If you think that you are bearing the full burden of the impact on revenue and staff and everything else. So, a couple of things from my perspective. One is there are things that's within your control. There are things that are not within your control. So there's no point getting stressed over things that's out of your control. That's one. The second point I like to make is there are lots of resources out there. If you think about how to manage your staff in COVID-19 and health and safety practices, there are lots of government website resources out there that tells you exactly what to do. So reach out. And the second thing is you as a leader need your own support network. I'm not just talking about your executive team and your staff and all that. Your peers in the market, your contacts in your network. You can rest assured every chief executive out there is facing similar challenges. You're not in this alone. So pick up the phone, call your best buddies, call your best mates and ask what are they doing? How are they coping? I think that sort of practical things, it's going to really help you stay sane, stay on course. And then going back to the point, manage what's within your control and be very open, transparent with the folks in your team. Involve them in your decision making.
Thanks, Juliette. I'm conscious of time, and I believe there might be a slight echo back, so I'll just reduce my volume. But for what it's worth, speaking as someone who's observing leaders at the top talk about vulnerability, you can't underestimate the power of hearing a leader say, hey, I know this is hard and there's nothing wrong with closing the door on your home office for a little while and going for a walk around the neighborhood and then coming back and boosting that productivity. Because a lot of people are finding balancing that working from home and office dynamic tricky, particularly if you're in a corporate environment. And it's really strong hearing your leaders say that and show their humanity. So don't be afraid to give it a go, and you might be surprised at what you see from your teams. In closing, there is a big question that's come through that is so massive that I just want to leave it as food for thought because it's very poignant. There is a growing movement throughout New Zealand that this crisis is giving us all a unique opportunity to challenge assumptions and to create a better New Zealand rather than recreate the old. What do you think is the leadership appetite among New Zealand businesses and companies to reimagine shifts in the current behaviors and action and practice new ways of being? So that's something that we would like to leave all of you with, because that is a big, poignant question, and hopefully one that we can pick up the phone and have chats to some of you about in the weeks to come. Or you may like to discuss that with each other and reimagine a different future New Zealand, certainly one where large office spaces may not be as relevant as they have been in the past. In our closing, we would love to invite you to our 2 upcoming webinars. Same time, same place, obviously, whilst we're still in lockdown. On the 7th of May, our webinar will be on developing the next generation of chief executives for Aotearoa, expanding on the qualitative research our firm did with a variety of senior leaders nationwide. And then on the 14th of May, our webinar will be on CEO succession planning with insights of board directors as well as chief people officers and CEOs, reflecting on the lessons we have learned as a business in seeing CEO succession managed well, but also badly. We would also be grateful if you could fill out a short survey for feedback on this webinar. We will send an email with the link and also follow up with the slide deck. Finally, we look forward to staying connected online or in person when the time allows. Until then, stay safe and kia kaha.